Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline Hoy, and I'm with Boardable. We're here to talk to you about how to double productivity between meetings. And if this is your first time hearing of Boardable, we are the software that not only helps you with everything you need for your board meetings and nonprofit meetings, but everything that happens in between those meetings, whether it's online voting, sharing documents, setting up a time for the meeting, or any of the things that you need your board members and staff to know. You can find it at boardable.com and sign up for a free 90-day trial, no credit cards. And I'd like to introduce you now to Kev Kayat. Thank you
Hello.
for joining us. He trains in the
Pleasure.
nonprofit sector, in person and online. Not so much in person these days, huh?
Not so much.
Across the US, Canada, and the UK, and he also hosts the Nonprofit Problem Solver podcast. Welcome, Kev. Would you like to add anything to that intro?
Not really. I think that sort of covers it. I've got about 25 years experience in health, social care, education, community services in both the UK and in the States, and I've done a lot of different roles in those organizations, from strategy and leadership to large-scale transformations and service design and implementation. So quite a range of generalized experience.
Well, we're so excited to have you here today to tell us how we can be more productive between all these meetings, Zoom or otherwise, right?
Right. Okay, just to jump in, the top 3 threats to productivity are lack of focus, distractions, and misaligned tasks. And they sort of build on each other. So it's really easy in our nonprofit world to think that everything we do and everything we could do and every opportunity is good. It's beneficial, it's for a good cause, we should do it. And in fact, that dilutes our impact. It makes it actually much, much more difficult to determine what it is that we should be doing. But it's really easy to be pulled in lots and lots of different directions. And that's quite common. And in that scenario, distractions become a problem because they're popping up all the time. I mean, that's just normal. But if you don't have the lack of focus, you are vulnerable to distractions. And misaligned tasks then come about because people are running off in different directions, trying to do what they think is the best version of their contribution to the organization's mission. So all these things create a sort of maelstrom of activity and busyness that may or may not be delivering your mission effectively.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
It does. Before I worked at Boardable, I was the executive director of a small nonprofit, and it just seemed like every day, a board member has an idea or heard about a brunch or something, and it's just like you feel you have to say yes to everything. Do you feel like this pertains to boards as much as staff, or is anyone particularly vulnerable to these 3 threats?
Well, I think it applies to the staff primarily because they're the ones executed. The executives are charged with delivering the mission, but I think it also applies to boards, which vary tremendously in their level of engagement, and that's even within a given board. So I don't think it would be unfamiliar or unfair to say that some board members are highly engaged, really understand the mission, they get it, they want to contribute, and others are less engaged. And sometimes they come to a quarterly meeting and it's a reminder for them when they read through the board notes about what the mission of the organization is. And I think that's just the nature of the beast, that we can't expect everybody to be 110% engaged in what we're doing.
I see. That's really interesting. Okay. So our top 3 threats: lack of focus, distractions, misaligned tasks.
Right. So the main question to address those issues and provide the focus aspirational. when we're looking at our intended impact, we want to be much more concrete.
Over the course of a year, or is this sort of a constant goal?
So I think it varies. It's probably not going to change too much over the course of a year unless you are absolutely killing it with your performance and you need to raise the bar, or for some other reason, could be the opposite, where you need to adjust the targets that you're expecting to achieve in that year. But the metrics that you use to define your impact may change from year to year, or even from program to program, because often they're set by grant makers or they're arranged in partnership with grant makers. But they should always be consistent and aligned to your overall mission and vision.
So you could say that this is the lens that we want to use when we're deciding whether or not to say yes to all of those opportunities that fly up.
That's right, and I think there's a slide coming up where we make that clear. But that will provide, if you have a very clear statement of what your intended impact is, that can provide the focus, which allows you to say yes or no. I'll give you an example. It's not unusual for a program officer that you have a good relationship with at a foundation to contact you and say, hey, we've just been given a pot of money. We have to get it distributed relatively quickly. We're going to have an expedited approvals process. Would you be interested in doing this program? And it's going to attach, say, $250,000 or something like that. And it's very easy to say, sure, we're going to do that, when in fact, you really should be asking, is it consistent with what it is you're trying to achieve? Is it consistent with your impact, or is it going to draw you away? Now, I know it's not common advice for people to hear that you should turn money away, but you should really be focusing on the impact that's going to make the most difference for the people that you serve.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's prioritizing the people that you're serving over even maybe temporary gains.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Okay. So I will say that there is no substitute for good project management and change management. So when you need to get things done in terms of productivity between meetings, of course you still need those skills. You need the tools and techniques of project management are always helpful. Social skills are number one, of course. And then in terms of change management, people change their behavior and improve their performance through learning. Those are sort of tried and tested ways of improving your productivity. So I just want to point that I'm not taking away from any of those. I'm sort of taking those as read, that those skills are important in improving your productivity. But if you have good project management, good change management, right? So that's just there in case anyone was wondering where those fit in, and those are important. Lots of places to get training in those. But the overall message is that less is more when it comes to nonprofit impact. You can either have less work with more focus and therefore greater impact, or you can have more work with less focus, less interconnectedness, a lot more distractions, and feel like you're doing lots and lots, adding more to your plate, working longer and longer hours, but actually showing less of an impact.
Do you have any tips for how can, for example, an executive director communicate this when they're having to say no to certain things?
I think if there's a very clear impact statement for the organization, and that becomes part of their branding, part of their storytelling, part of the way they present themselves, then it's relatively easy, particularly over time, to narrow the focus and to let grant makers and other funders and donors know what it is that you want to do really well. A metaphor I came across recently is that a 100-watt light bulb will light up a room really brightly. And in that room, you'll be able to see everything very clearly. you, in fact, will take a few minutes to absorb all that visual information. A 100-watt laser, on the other hand, will cut through metal. So we tend in social impact circles to admire problems, is to have that light bulb moment when we're looking at the world in which we're trying to make a difference, when in fact it would be much better to adopt a laser-like approach on the problem that we want to address.
Interesting. I think it can be really tempting to want to do the light bulb approach and just do a little of everything and dabble and say yes, but in the long run, that's not going to get us where we need to go.
No, it's not. I think there are different types, of course, of nonprofits. There are organizations that exist for the benefit of their members and in a genuine community capacity, where they're not addressing at working with human services. They dilute their impact by trying to be a light is not going to address the impact. It'll help you understand where you can make impact, but you will need that laser to make the difference. So thanks for that comment.
I see.
So just to reiterate, impact then becomes your North Star, your orientating feature. And to your point, Carolyn, about where you say yes and no to things is, and this is presented as a really stark line, and I know in the real world it can be a bit more vague and fuzzy than this. But in an ideal situation, you would only do what contributes directly to your impact, and you would stop doing anything else. You would stop doing the things that don't contribute to impact. You would stop adding things that don't contribute to impact. And you can use that test, a litmus test for impact, to say, is this a thing that we should be doing? You can also use it when you have choices over what you could do to gauge whether option A or versus option B makes a greater contribution to impact, and you prioritize accordingly.
This is a really tough one, I think, and it's just so helpful to have this reminder.
Yeah, good. So I'll move on to something specific around board members that we often hear in terms of productivity and getting things done and contributing to impact. A very common view that I hear from board chairs and from executive directors and development officers is that the challenge in engaging the board is that they're volunteers. And the sort of, well, they're volunteers. They've given their time. They come to the meetings. So how much really can we ask of them? And the solution is actually they're volunteers. They're presumably bought into the mission and vision to a certain degree and are prepared to show up without being paid, and that in itself is a value. And volunteers, I think, are an untapped resource in many organizations, and board members are really the, if you will, the highest status version of a volunteer. And volunteers are best understood not as a job title, but as a pay grade. So people are not being compensated for their time and their efforts, but they are there showing up because they are contributing to your mission, to your vision, and to your impact. So really, they need to be treated as full members of staff, even if they're not full-time, and handled in the same way as you would paid staff when it comes to recruitment, onboarding, and performance. And that means being very clear at the outset what type of volunteers you want and what you're going to be expecting from them, so you get the right sort of people. And that's vital when it comes to having an active, productive board, so that people don't think it's okay to just show up to meetings once a quarter and maybe show up at the annual event. If you're expecting them to do more, then say so at the front end, recruit them accordingly, onboard them accordingly, and be clear about their performance. Another common tactic I see is that people come onto a board, say for a 3 or 4 year term, and we'll say, we'll let them hang out for a year, get their feet wet, try to understand what the organization is about, then we'll give them a committee to join or a task to do. And again, if you want to have a productive, active board, get them working on something straight away. Give them something to sink their teeth in, to learn around, and get them actively involved. Again, if that's what you'd want out of your board. But the fact that they're volunteers is not in itself a reason for a board member not to be active if you want something else from them.
That's a really interesting idea about giving them something to sink their teeth into right away, because it stands to reason that that would not only set an expectation of contributing, but also it's exciting and rewarding to be able to do something right away that makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think you want to design your volunteer experience so that they are feeling like they are contributing to the mission, that even if they're doing 3 hours a month, that those 3 hours actually matter and that you value that organization. I've heard people say, well, we can't keep banging on about the mission over and over and over again, because people will start to roll their eyes and they'll become sort of desensitized to it. And my experience is the opposite, is that volunteers want to feel part of something, because remember, they are not being paid. So they want that sense of community, that sense of contribution, and that is rewarding. That is why they are volunteering.
Huh. And so you think some of this is a matter of expectations before we ever even get started. In
Yes.
order to be more productive, we have to, let people know exactly what they're signing up for, and that we're expecting follow through on that.
Right. Exactly. There's a performance element to it that is applicable, even though for many EDs, it's easy to think of the board as sort of, in the org chart above them because they're hired and report to the board, but it's a joint effort in terms of managing all the work. So I will say that it is important that someone on the board is playing that role, and it's typically the board chair, but not always, where the board chair or this other person on the board, if it's not the board chair, is providing to the executive director, acting as what I refer to as the honest activator. Honest in that we're not just telling each other what we want to hear. We're not just patting each other on the back and saying, "Oh, isn't it great that we're doing all this good work?" But is dealing with the real issues in a genuine way. An activator in terms of activating other board members and providing that feedback to the executive director, which is vital because the ED role can be very lonely.
For sure.
It can be very difficult sometimes to get the supportive feedback that you need as an ED to keep going each and every day. And so that relationship for EDs is vital. It's important to make sure there's someone on the board who is providing that role.
And then that person can also support the executive director when they push back on that focus dilution that we were talking about earlier.
Well, that's right. I mean, this person should be endorsing, if you will, that focus and helping that message get through to the rest of the board, to the wider community that the board interacts with, so that it becomes part of the brand and the storytelling for the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was my last slide.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit, as you are entering some of your questions, a little bit more about some concrete tips. Let's say that we don't have a lot of focus at the nonprofit and we want to sort of do a culture shift to have more of that. What are some ways that you can kind of realign that focus if you've gotten to the light bulb stage versus your laser?
Right. Well, I think the mission and vision statements play a role here because they may or may not be as tight as you may want. I know there are lots of organizations that work with, say, children and young people, and it's not uncommon to have a mission that says we want to give all children the best start in life possible, which sounds lovely, but doesn't really identify what it is that this organization is going to do differently to another organization. Um, so that mission is not going to drive focus. So there's got to be an exercise not dissimilar to generating your mission statement, which is your organization's impact statement. I found that's a useful exercise for, if not executive directors and the board, sometimes the executive team, is to say, what is the impact that we're going to make? How are the people we're going to serve going to have a better life? What is the difference that we are going to make in their lives? And you can get very practical here and very detailed with the types of metrics and things that you are going to measure. So, if you're providing, say, for example, if you're working in food security and hunger, the old style metrics of how many tons of food we've acquired and distributed doesn't really say anything about impact. But if your impact is around the food security of certain communities, then that's something that you can focus on and measure in a different way.
And then I think that makes a good conversation point when you're with the board or with the staff and, you're trying to decide how to move forward on big decisions. If you can always bring it back to that question, then everyone's having the same conversation. It's not, well, the board's thinking about fundraising specifically, but the ED is thinking about, the service that they're providing. It helps align everybody more.
Well, I think it does. And the other element, I think, is that we know that in this current situation, the amount of money for nonprofits is going to decrease. We are facing a shrinking pie. And the conversations will get beyond mission and good causes, and then we'll probably start to move sooner than most people are prepared to results. And impacts and impact statements and impact measures define the results. Now, I know they say that facts tell and stories sell, but there is a story around the impacts that you are able to deliver. If you can say to potential donors or foundations that not so much this is the cause and the mission, but these are the results that we achieve, then when you're going back, not just when you're requesting funds, but when you're reporting on how they were used, that's a much stronger story, because people know that the resources weren't just used for a good cause, but actually for good results.
Yes, that's something I think a lot of nonprofits struggle with, is getting those metrics consistent and, over history, having enough of them to really paint a concrete picture like that.
Well, it is different. I mean, metrics is sort of a whole separate subject, and one that's dear to my heart as an unreconstructed data geek. But the one of the biggest challenges, I think, in our sector with metrics is that there's so little standardization, or what has been standard in the past is what's been easy to measure, and that's not necessarily impact. And even when we get to a point where we're very clear what it is that we want to measure, there are challenges within an organization because it's typically not a single person's job. There are those people who collect data, there's those people who analyze and crunch numbers, and then those people who respond to what the figures are telling us, and all that needs to be aligned and understood as a system. And that takes some doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. We have a few questions coming in. If you want to keep adding those, I just want to tell you about our webinar that's coming up next month. We're going to have Sherry Quam Taylor with us to talk about how to raise revenue all month, not just during your meetings, but the rest of the month as well, as we talk about, again, that productivity between our meetings. And she's going to have some methods for you that aren't all asking for money, which I know your board members will appreciate. So if you want to join us in May on Thursday, May 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, you can register for that at boardable.com as well. And we will have that in your replay email too, that link.
Full endorsement to Sherry. She's wonderful. She was on my nonprofit problem solver panel yesterday.
Really?
Well, it was the topic was marketing and fundraising, so she was one of a number of people on the panel. Yeah, she's fantastic.
A small nonprofit world here. She was recommended to me by Bloomerang, so lots of endorsements there. And again, here's Kev's contact information. He's got tons of great resources on his site. Tell us about some of the things you have there, resource-wise.
Right. Well, I've got there's a downloadable PDF, which is the top 3 barriers to impact, that says a number of things that we've sort of touched on. I've got some online courses with regard to managing work-life balance, which is a course called Your Perfect Plate, and that identifies exactly what you should be doing that works to your strengths. There is a change management course called High Five the New Normal, which I'm about to launch through my Facebook group, which I've mentioned down there, which is the Broad Eye Academy for Mission-Led Managers. It's a free but private group, so we can manage the content there. And I've also got a course coming up soon called Impact Manager Flight School, which is designed for those earlier to mid-career professionals who have spent a fair bit of time possibly in nonprofits, but have always been individual contributors and suddenly find themselves with a team and often make 2 classic mistakes. One is that they're going to treat everybody the same, and the second is that they're going to have everybody do things the way that they've done them. And those are 2 mistakes we can address. But in the flight school, there are some things they can do for speed and some things they can do for lift in terms of accelerating their management skills.
Love it. Okay, let's look at some of these questions here. Oh goodness, we've got a lot. Wonderful. Okay. Natalie says her board is a working board and therefore they get burnt out quickly. Ooh, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it's hard to respond to that directly without knowing exactly what it is that they are working on and why they get burnt out. I don't know if Natalie can add any more detail to that. And I don't know also whether that's a situation of, I don't want to be dismissive and say it could be busyness when they could be being, extremely impactful. So I don't know that I can address that one without further detail, Natalie, but I'd be happy to do that offline if that's helpful.
Great. Let's see. Natalie also asks, is it normal to have the ED attend board meetings in its entirety?
That's not unusual practice.
Yeah. Experience. That's something we've covered in board or previous webinars, and there does seem to be a lot of variety there. Some attend for parts of it or do their reports and leave. Others want to be there the entire time.
Well, some EDs are also full members of the board. It really depends on the way the board is construed.
Yeah, I guess that's a matter of checking your bylaws.
Mm-hmm.
But, Natalie, we have a great board governance expert, Kim Donahue, who does a lot of work with us. So if you want to shoot me any emails about that, I could connect you with her. Let's see. Pam says board statement, showcase and preserve history. So
yes, that's a big mission.
Yeah. So
expansive.
That is a lot. But the board statement in general, can help sort of encapsulate maybe not the more broad mission and vision, as you said, but sort of the board's focus.
So I think in this case, to sort of the practical, tactical examples here is, what does showcase actually mean? How would you know that it's happened? How would you know that it's effective? What does good showcasing look like? And how could you point to a specific example and said, yes, we showcased history in that situation, and preserve the same thing. And it may be in fact easier, restoring oil paintings, for example, or raising money to save something from being demolished. I don't know what the situation is in this case, but you can be more specific. You can take those words and provide more specific examples that would help craft a clearer impact statement.
Mm-hmm. So what was that you said? How do you know it's been done? How do you measure it?
Yeah, what evidence would you point to say, yes, we did that and we did it well?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Darlene asks, how would you convince the ED that volunteer board and committees can be trusted to contribute to the mission?
I think the big word in this one is trusted. I mean, I don't know what's behind that. I'm not sure why volunteer board and committees would be involved if they're not interested in contributing to the mission. But I guess without knowing what type of organization it is, again, I'm not sure I can do justice to the question in a general sense, other than that, if you have recruited and onboarded and support your volunteer board and committees well, then they should be, you would hope that trusting them is part of the criteria for their involvement.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some internal problems there with the executive director. I don't know.
Quite possibly. Well, Darlene, I'd be happy again to provide a more specific answer if you want to take that offline, because you don't want to, a bit more discretion in how you cover that topic.
Here's a great one from Natalie. We hear this a lot. We seem to be all excited at our monthly meetings, but then tend to lose steam between the next one, so not much gets accomplished. How do you keep everyone engaged between meetings while not overwhelming them, as this is a volunteer job, as we said?
That's a great question, Natalie, and I think the answer is matching the demand with supply in terms of time and effort. So if people, it is a volunteer job in quotes. So say people can offer, an hour a week, or half an hour a week, or 2 hours every 2 weeks, or whatever it is. The tasks you're expecting them to do meeting to meeting should be commensurate with that amount of time, and with that excitement at the end of one meeting should end with a set of actions that people will take away, with an expectation that they will be, if not completed, at least moving along, because they may be a longer term action, that they should have some progress that you can expect to report. And the good discipline is to start the following meeting, or have at least some point early in the next meeting an update. Well, this is the schedule of actions we ended last time. Where are we? And have people report out. And the culture should be that you're expected to do them. And if there's not that culture, then if there's no expectation things get done, it's not surprising that nothing gets done.
Yeah, that there's some losing steam. And
right. Excitement, but by the way, the point being that excitement isn't enough.
There needs to be more accountability. In Boardable, we do have a task tracking app, which I love, because while you're taking minutes, you can assign a task to a specific person, and then it shows up on their personal dashboard, and they, can be reminded of, oh yeah, I did promise that I would do, X, Y, and Z at the last meeting. But any way that you can find to provide some sort of, like you said, that accountability at the end of the meeting of who said that they would do what, and then that sort of reckoning at the next meeting. If you don't have your things done, there's an expectation that you're going to have to explain it a little bit.
So I've scrolled back to this slide where the project management, there is no substitute for this. There's still stuff needs to get done. This is your basically your task mastership. So Boardable has some tools. There are some basic techniques. There are spreadsheets and all sorts of things you can do to track what's happening. But an important element here is that the social skills are number one. And the way we know that is that you can have somebody diligently record all the tasks, who's supposed to do them, by when, and so on. That doesn't mean anything's going to happen. Equally, you can have somebody who doesn't write anything down, but is also a very good project manager. And the difference is that the effective project manager has mastered the social skills associated with engaging all the people who are party to that project and need to know certain information at certain times in order to make their contribution and make that contribution effectively. So the socially aware, the socially skilled project manager knows where every task is at every moment in time, whether it's written down or not.
And is that a matter of checking in regularly? What would you say is the biggest?
It's all those things. So it's using the full breadth of social engagement, conversations, text, email, whatever it is, with the people involved in a given project, so that as the project manager, the person accountable for getting it done, you know what the status is of everything at any point in time. So if task A needs to be done before task B can even be started, then you know where task A is, so that those responsible for B know when to expect its arrival, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of other examples. But I just wanted to make that point that there's that tools need to be matched with that human element that actually manages the work.
Interesting. Okay. Meg says, do you have an example of a best practice impact statement, one that you think provides the right level of focus and detail?
I do have a lot of examples I could share, but they vary. The right level of focus and detail is an organization-specific question, because it depends on the resources you have to make a particular impact. So two organizations working in the same space, allegedly trying to make very similar impacts, might have different impact statements because of the way they go about doing what it is that they need to do. So I could share some, Meg, with you, but what would work for your organization and what you're able to measure over what particular period of time and what's consistent with your mission and vision will be unique to your situation.
Mm-hmm. Angie says, our board has a scorecard to keep track of commitments and responsibilities for board members. Do you have any recommendations of an application or process that is easy for the board member to communicate actions while not putting work on agency and staff? I think that's one of the challenges here, is that it seems that a lot of this comes back on staff to manage.
Right. Well, again, the difference between agency staff and board members is in a sense the pay status is different for volunteers, but really it's the most effective boards are well integrated with the agency staff, and when agency staff are working out what their own work commitments are and their plans, they ideally know what role board members are going to play. So again, this could be a situation with lack of focus or distractions where staff are not expecting ad hoc requests for work from board members, and it's not part and parcel of what people expect to do. And so it will always seem like a burden.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, that's one of those things where it depends a lot on your board chair, and maybe your executive director can make a big difference on whether or not the board is integrated and supported and all of that too.
Well, it's very easy to fall into the trap of completely separating what the agency does and how the board exercises its oversight through committees. And there is an argument for saying that there needs to be some distance and separation. However, the role of a board member as a volunteer and as not being there sort of day to day is almost by definition oversight, because you're not expecting them to actually do the work. You're expecting them to do work, but it's not the delivery work, if you will, the programmatic work of the organization. So the work that they're doing is should be very clearly defined as oversight, but that needs to be or is best coordinated with the programmatic work that it's overseeing.
Mm-hmm. That kind of goes back to what you were saying about the metrics. There are the people who are recording them in the programs each day. There are the people who use that information, which might be the board, and the person who's preparing that middle piece there. And you need to have all of those unified in order for the information to be helpful.
Right.
All right. Looks like that's about it for now. I'd like to thank everyone again, especially you, Kev, for joining us.
No, thank you.
And we will get that replay out to you tomorrow. If you have specific questions you'd like Kev to address, there was his contact information on that last slide, which will be in your replay email as well, the slide deck download. And I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you about more productivity between meeting techniques.
Always happy to entertain direct emails from anybody. It's kev@broadiconsulting.com.
All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.